Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to APUS History. This is the first video in the line of things, even though I made a bunch of them last year. I didn't start doing them until a little bit later in the school year, and so there really aren't videos covering this period right here. This video is going to be about part of the study guide from 1491 to 1607, and the new curricular framework for the College Board. That's a period that is going to be emphasized on the exam to the extent of 5%. That is to say, it's not going to be the whole test, but you can't ignore it. So if you think, well, they're not going to cover anything before the English founding of Jamestown in 1607, the College Board is saying, no, my friend. No. That is not true. That is false. Okay? You have to know that material as well. So if you're unfamiliar with the videos here, we're going to make our way through the study guide. Your study guide should look like that. And we're going to go through the material giving kind of a brief statement of what the main idea is. And hopefully you can follow along, and this will reiterate some of the points that we've made in class, or perhaps that we're going to make in class as we go through some time here. So, let's get it going. What are some characteristics of settled and nomadic pre-Columbian Native American societies? Well, let's talk about those two things for a moment. There are some settled Native American societies, huge ones, the Mayas, the Incas, the Aztecs. Those are groups that mastered the production of agriculture. That's the common thread there, agriculture. If you were able to create a reliable food source over the course of time, that means you don't have to be nomadic. Other areas of the Americas, we're going to see a lot of nomadic movement of tribes with the food sources, the herd basically, or with weather changes and patterns as the year would go along. Now, let's move that discussion over then into talking about Native American ideas. And I want to phrase this in the way that Native American ideas might have clashed with European ideas. Number one, generally speaking, Native Americans were polytheistic. They believed in a variety of different gods, most of which were tied to nature. That's something that's different from the European belief. So there's number one. Number two, they tended to view, and they, being Native Americans, tended to view land ownership as being something that was communal, not privately held. Europeans had a possessive idea of land, right? We believe that if you live on the land, you own the land. It's your land. Now, Native Americans didn't really see it that way. They felt as though they were more caretakers of the land, and they were there to use the land, not abuse the land, and hopefully return to that land when the season came again next year, but they would move from place to place. So if Europeans showed up and no one was on the land, they would almost think, oh my gosh, it's here, it's ours, we can take it. Not the way the Native Americans viewed it. Number three, a lot of the groups tended to be matrilineal. In other words, the line of power went through the women of the tribe and not the men, as we'll talk about as time goes on here. That's a very, very different concept from the way the Europeans viewed things. Okay. Number four, we're dealing with a society that developed some levels of sophistication. Okay. They don't have the same technologies that Europeans have when they arrived, so there is going to be kind of an awestruck nature to some of the interaction, but that doesn't mean that they haven't developed anything at all. Now, there are examples of civilizations on our study guide here. The way the new curricular framework works for the College Board is that you are not required to cover every single example of something. In other words, there are general concepts that we all have to know, but then there are specific concepts that teachers can choose to emphasize. Instead of emphasizing all of them, let's emphasize a few of them. Okay, and so for instance, we're going to spend our time with a few of the Native American tribes and how they dealt with their environment, starting with the Pueblo Indians of the American Southwest. So here you have to think basically modern day Arizona, New Mexico, hot, dry, arid conditions. These are people who mastered those conditions by building into the side of the rocks, into the hillside, if you will, and staying out of that tortuous sun, and also became masters of irrigation, trying to find water, mastering the movement of it, the conservation of it over time in order to assure that you had water in order to grow crops and to survive. The Chinook Indians, we got to head north up to what would be modern-day Washington, a little bit of northern Oregon in there as well. But the Chinooks live along the coast, so their resources are going to be those huge trees of the great state of Washington, go trees, okay, and also the ocean. We're going to rely upon the ocean for our food sources. We're going to rely upon the trees for our building and for canoes and for weaponry and all of those things, and we're going to use those environments to help us. Now let's jump across the country the other way, the Iroquois. The Iroquois are a tribe of Indians that are going to have a lot of interaction with the French and with the English settlers when they arrive. So the first two groups we were talking about are on the west coast. This one's over on the east coast. So let's go west side, east side. Okay, there's a thing on my screen that just told me it was 20% battery, so I touched that, in case you're wondering why I touched the screen. All right, so the Iroquois are really a very sophisticated group in a number of ways. They're hunter-gatherers, and so they've mastered those sorts of areas. Great tradespeople. They have this large alliance, though, that really distinguishes them from others. The Iroquois had gathered together what really was a political alliance among Native Americans, something we don't see very often. The Iroquois then are going to be able to deal with Europeans in a way that makes Europeans a little bit uncomfortable. They're not used to Native American groups that stick together. Generally speaking, as we're going to see time and time again, Europeans are able to pick off Native American tribes because it's really one tribe against. And the Iroquois had political alliances that made them stronger. And in a sense, that's a sophisticated idea when we look at government. Moving down, what motives or advances allowed Europeans to make the voyages across the Atlantic? Well, motives, we really chalk those up to the big three G's: gold, God, and glory. That those things pushed Europeans across the ocean. But let's talk about the particular time frame of things. As voyages of exploration are taking place across the Atlantic Ocean, a number of factors to consider. European monarchs that we call the new monarchs are beginning to try and consolidate their power in Europe. One of the ways to do that is to make more money, or expand territory, or expand the faith of your realm. Exploration offers the opportunity for all of those things. This is also the age of religious reformation, starting in 1517 with Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. The fight to convert individuals who may not have been Catholic or may not be churched in a technical European sense is going to be a really huge battle. We're going to move across the ocean in order to try and get new converts and bring them over to our particular brand of Christianity, whether that be Catholicism or a branch of the Protestant faith. Okay? What else is going on? All of those developments then are spurring this thinking and creativity of the age of the Renaissance in order to develop new technology. We've got items like the sextant, the creation of better maps, more accurate compasses. The big questions of the day in a technological sense are, how do we sort of map our way across the ocean? How do we get from A to B as quickly as possible? More durable boats, better stargazing devices, more accurate maps. All of those things make for voyages that are going to be quicker. And quicker is the ticket. If you can get across the ocean to the resources of the New World, as the Spanish are going to here in a moment, it is all about the Benjamins. Just like that. I know I mixed things there. You're going to be like, well, it's not all about the Benjamins and then make it rain. It's not the same thing. Okay? What weapons allowed Cortez and Pizarro to overwhelm the Aztecs and the Incas? Really a few things. Number one, they had firepower that those tribes had not seen, but they didn't have a lot of it. It's not as though they showed up like it was Call of Duty. They showed up with a very limited number of weapons. But using those weapons sparingly, they were able to make huge progress and gains. Okay? Number two, they had fear, if you will. The natives believed in many instances, and in these instances in particular, that the Europeans represented gods, and therefore they treated them in a deferential way. They were willing to sort of bow down to them early on. The most powerful weapon that the Europeans had was disease. All right? Between the initial contact in 1492 and the next 100 years, historians estimate that nearly 90% of the Native American populations between the Caribbean islands and the top of North America died of disease. In other words, European diseases got into the native populations and wiped them out. So when the Europeans arrived, although there is some resistance, and we'll talk about those resistance moments, it is generally true that the resistance is not going to be strong enough because the populations are not large enough in order to offer huge resistance. So Cortez and Pizarro have weapons, but the most powerful weapons they have really aren't physical ones. They're the presence that they bring with them, this fear that the natives might have had, and disease. And there are plenty of reports of biological warfare, that they purposely got people sick. Now that's debatable as well. But those diseases are going to make a huge difference. Part 2 coming soon.